Come in. Come in. Hello. You find me sitting down to a rare pleasure of completely relaxed reading and smoking my pipe. Now, this particular pipe is a favourite. It's a Sherlock Holmes original. I'll show you. It's made by Peterson, and they brought out a Sherlock Holmes series because, of course, Sherlock Holmes is famous. Get this one going. Famous for his pipe smoking, and they have a whole series, but this was the very original one. However, in fact, I'm enjoying the Sherlock Holmes original twice over, because this also is a Sherlock Holmes original. This is an original copy of the first binding together of the Strand Magazine, an illustrated monthly from 1891. There it is, volume 2, July to December. Well, Conan Doyle had published the very first Sherlock Holmes, The Study in Scarlet, in 1887. And it was all right. It was a kind of a niche market thing, but he decided to publish in the Strand Magazine, starting in 1891, a series of short stories about his hero, Sherlock Holmes, which the public went wild for. And that's when Holmes became the famous detective that Holmes is, and Watson the famous recorder. And the very first of them, the magazine, it's lovely to see it in its original context. This particular set of magazines starts with photos of celebrities of the day, some stuff about a bicycle military thing, a wonderful series of tableau vivant, all kinds of things, and then suddenly you come across The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by A. Conan Doyle. The famous opening line of The Scandal in Bohemia. To Sherlock Holmes, she is always the woman. I have seldom heard him mention her under any other name. In his eyes she eclipses and predominates the whole of her sex. It was not that he felt any emotion akin to love for Irene Adler. All emotions, and that one particularly, were abhorrent to his cold, precise, but admirably balanced mind. He was, I take it, the most perfect reasoning and observing machine that the world has seen. But as a lover, he would have placed himself in a false position. Wonderful, intriguing, famous opening. So in this story, we have the mysterious woman and the fact that the King of Bohemia has had an affair with this woman and is trying to hush it up. It's very funny, he comes in trying to disguise himself, but he's so regal. Here's a picture of him in disguise, supposedly in disguise as an ordinary person. I think he might be rather drawing attention to himself. Anyway, Holmes takes on the case. But the woman is, in some ways, as brilliant and as calculating as Holmes. It also introduces to us the idea that Holmes can do a series of disguises. There's Holmes disguised as a drunken-looking groom, but the most famous disguise is the disguise as a clergyman, an innocent clergyman. Look at this, wonderful. The hat. Let me read you that description. He disappeared into his bedroom and returned a few minutes later in the character of an amiable and simple-minded nonconformist clergyman. His broad black hat, his baggy trousers, his white tie, his sympathetic smile, and general look of peering and benevolent curiosity were such as Mr. John Hare alone could have equalled. It was not merely that Holmes changed his costume, his expression, his manner. His very soul seemed to vary with every fresh part that he assumed. The stage lost a fine actor, even as science lost an acute reasoner, when he became a specialist in crime. It's such fine writing. So, I won't do any plot spoilers, in case you haven't read that story. But this set of this little run of the Strand Magazine also includes a wonderful story, The Adventure of the Redheaded League. That happens to contain the passage which I suppose is right at the core of the celebrated association between Sherlock Holmes and pipes. And they're really at the very heart of the mystery, and nobody can make head nor tail of it. And Holmes needs to do a bit of thinking. So what does he do? Well, what are you going to do then? I asked, Watson speaking. To smoke, he answered. It is quite a 3-pipe problem, and I beg that you won't speak to me for 50 minutes. He curled himself up in his chair, with his thin knees drawn up to his hawk-like nose, and there he sat, with his eyes closed, and his black clay pipe thrusting out like a bill from some strange bird. I'd come to the conclusion that he had dropped to sleep, and indeed was nodding myself, when he suddenly sprang out of his chair with a gesture of a man who has made up his mind, and put his pipe down upon the mantelpiece. And there he is. That's just as described, drawn up with his knees drawn up in the chair, and wonderful. Now, it's a pleasure to read the stories in the context in which they were first published, with all the other things, all the other ancillary parts and the wonderful early illustrations, and to feel I'm just like one of those ardent and new fans in the 1890s who couldn't wait for the next volume, the next monthly volume of the Strand to come out. Because, of course, sometimes you were only halfway through the mystery and you really couldn't wait to see all the clues solved. But I love that phrase. This is a 3-pipe problem. And since I smoke my pipe also when I'm having to do concentrated thinking, particularly both when I'm composing sermons and even more so when I'm composing poems. And so I sometimes say to myself of a piece of work I'm doing, well, this is a 3-pipe poem. I've even, as you know, occasionally written poems about the pleasures that the pipe gives me. But to sit in my corner of my study, particularly just to find a moment of calm and reading, my mother loved the Sherlock Holmes stories, as does my sister and my daughter and my wife. We're all fans of Holmes, and so I have pleasure reading the story now as I think about my mother. And in these days, immediately after my bereavement, I'm remembering her in all kinds of ways. And I think, well, all my pleasures are increased by knowing that they were pleasures to her too. And it's interesting because she's, as it were, the person from whom the poetry comes. But I suppose counterbalancing the poetry, there's also a proper strand of careful reasoning and thinking and logic and deduction necessary in one's life. But I suppose the paradox, the real paradox of Conan Doyle's genius, is that although his hero is this thinking machine, all the descriptions of Holmes, the thinking machine, are given to us with the most brilliant and beautiful use of the creative imagination and the poetry of his extraordinary and lapidary prose. Anyway, it's nice to share with you 2 originals, both Sherlock Holmes originals. Thanks for dropping by.